One waitress, one arrogant millionaire, and a grand piano. What started as a cruel attempt to humiliate her turned into a moment that silenced the room and shattered egos. You won't believe how she turned the tables with nothing but her talent. It was a warm Friday evening, and the hum of conversations filled the air at La Fontaine, an upscale restaurant tucked into the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina. The clinking of glasses, soft footsteps of servers, and the faint strains of jazz from a corner piano created an ambience of refined indulgence. Deborah, a 25-year-old waitress with a quiet demeanor and an unmistakable spark in her eyes, moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates and smiles. To most patrons, she was just another face in uniform, but inside she carried dreams bigger than the luxurious dining room around her. Deborah's passion wasn't serving tables. It was music ever since she was a child. The piano had been her refuge, a place where she could express every joy, every sorrow, and every unspoken thought. But dreams don't pay the bills. Working long shifts at La Fontaine was a necessity, a stepping stone toward the music academy. She longed to attend. Few knew about her talent, except for the restaurant staff who occasionally caught her stealing moments at the old upright piano in the back room during break that night. As the evening rush began to settle, the door swung open, and in walked Leonard Grayson, instantly recognizable. The wealthy entrepreneur made an entrance like he owned the room, flanked by a few equally polished companions. Leonard exuded she mimicked the songs on the radio, then ventured into classical pieces she found in second-hand music books. Her talent didn't go unnoticed. She played at church school recital and community events, but recognition couldn't mask the financial hurdles that loomed over her dreams by the time she turned 18. The reality was clear. A professional music career would have to wait. Scholarships didn't come through, and family responsibilities took precedence. Deborah packed away her concert ambitions, replacing them with the practicality of earning a living. Yet she couldn't entirely give up. The piano was more than a dream. It was her identity when she moved to Raleigh. A few years ago, Deborah sought out a job at La Fontaine, not just because of the pay, but because of the grand piano tucked into the corner of the restaurant, even though she rarely had time to play it. Just knowing it was there gave her a sense of comfort. Music hadn't left her. It was simply waiting that night as Leonard and his entourage took their seats. Deborah approached their table, balancing a tray with practiced grace. Leonard ordered a top-shelf scotch and cracked a joke loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Deborah offered a polite smile as she took their orders, her voice steady, despite the strange energy radiating from him. "Deborah, Leonard said, glancing at her name tag. "Sounds like someone with a lot of hidden talents?" The comment caught her off guard, but she nodded politely and stepped away to place their orders. She didn't notice the knowing grin he shared with his companion, nor the way his eyes followed her every move. But Leonard wasn't just observing, he was planning, and Deborah would soon find herself at the center of a spectacle she never asked for. The night carried on like any other, with the hum of laughter and silverware filling the room. Deborah kept her pace steady, avoiding Leonard's gaze as she moved between tables. She dealt with difficult customers before, but something about him felt different, not just rude, but calculated. His presence loomed like a shadow, making her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite shake by the time the appetizers were served. Leonard had already started his performance, though not the kind Deborah expected. He held court at his table, loudly recounting tales of his success and peppering in jabs about people who lacked ambition. His entourage laughed dutifully, while other diners shot annoyed glances in his direction. Deborah tried to stay focused on her tasks, but as she returned to his table with a bottle of wine, Leonard caught her off guard. "Tell me, Deborah," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "what do you do when you're not carrying plates? Surely a young woman like you has dreams." His words stopped her mid-pee. Deborah hesitated, then gave a careful answer. "I play piano." "Sometimes," she said softly, hoping to keep it brief. Leonard's eyes lit up, and a SL smile curled across his lips. "A pianist. Huh. How fascinating. Why don't you give us a little performance?" Deborah froze. The room seemed to go silent, the weight of Leonard's words hanging in the air. "Oh, I couldn't," she said quickly, forcing a nervous laugh. "I'm just here to work tonight." But Leonard wasn't about to let it go. "Nonsense!" he declared, his voice booming. "There's a piano right there in the corner. Show us what you've got. Surely a future star like you isn't afraid of a little audience." His companions chuckled, clearly enjoying the scene. Other diners turned to look, curious about the commotion. Deborah's chest tightened. She could feel their eyes on her, the silent judgment ready to fall. She wanted to say no, to walk away. But Leonard's challenge lingered in the air, daring her to rise to it, or crumble. "I really shouldn't," Deborah stammered, glancing around for support. But even her colleagues looked unsure, unwilling to step in. Leonard leaned back in his chair, sipping his scotch with a smug smirk. "Ah, I see," he said mockingly. "All talk, no talent. That's disappointing." The words hit like a slap. Deborah's hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't one to seek confrontation, but the way he dismissed her, like she was nothing, cut deep. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Never let anyone make you small, Deborah. You're bigger than they'll ever know." Silence stretched between them. Deborah looked at the piano, then back at Leonard. His smirk dared her to prove him wrong, and against her better judgment she did. "Fine," she said, her voice low but steady. "I'll play." The room bristled with anticipation as Deborah walked toward the piano. Each step carried the weight of fear and defiance. The dining room seemed to hold its breath. The grand piano gleamed under the chandelier's soft light. It felt like a spotlight had been cast on her, separating her from the murmuring crowd. Her fingers trembled as she sat on the bench. The keys sparkled like a challenge waiting to be answered. Behind her, Leonard reclined in his chair, still wearing that smug look, as if he'd already won. Deborah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out her thoughts. This wasn't a church recital. This wasn't a friendly community gathering. This was something else. This was a test. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool surface. The first notes were soft, hesitant, fragile. Someone coughed in the back. A few chairs shifted. Deborah ignored it all. Her focus sharpened as she leaned into the music. She chose a piece she knew by heart, Clair de Lune by Debussy. The melody flowed into the room, weaving through the air like silk. Delicate, but steady. As her confidence grew, the music swelled. Her hands danced across the keys, graceful despite the storm inside her. Each note was a piece of her truth, the sacrifices her mother made, the hours of practice in a tiny room, the weight of dreams long postponed but never forgotten. The room grew still. Even Leonard had gone quiet. Deborah didn't need to look to know the energy had shifted. The mockery had faded, replaced by something else. Or, maybe, respect. Or something deeper. She let herself go. For the first time in years, she wasn't a waitress or a struggling dreamer. She was simply herself, an artist. Her fingers poured her soul into every chord. When the final note rang out, the room was completely silent. Deborah stayed frozen, her hands still on the keys. Then the applause erupted, loud and full, echoing through the room like thunder. Some diners stood, clapping with a fervor that brought tears to her eyes. Her co-workers watched in stunned admiration. Those who had watched from the sidelines joined the applause, their faces glowing with pride. Leonard, however, remained seated. His smirk was gone, replaced by an unreadable mix of shock and discomfort. He clapped slowly, a hollow gesture, but even that couldn't diminish what Deborah had just accomplished. She had reclaimed her voice, and no one could take that away. As the applause faded, the room seemed to exhale. Deborah rose, her knees shaking but her back straight. She looked around, seeing the crowd not as spectators, but as witnesses. Their faces reflected admiration and respect. She nodded politely to those who had clapped the loudest, a faint smile on her lips. Not pride, but relief. Eventually, her eyes found Leonard. He sat with hands clasped, his earlier arrogance vanished. "Well," he said too loudly, breaking the silence. "That was unexpected." He chuckled, though it lacked conviction. "I suppose talent really does come from the most surprising places." His words fell flat. Deborah studied him. They were meant as a compliment, but rang hollow. "Thank you," she replied evenly, calm, but firm. She wouldn't let him shrink her again. Leonard, uneasy under the attention, asked for another drink. "You've got quite a gift," he added, almost begrudgingly. Deborah nodded. "Everyone has a gift. It's how you choose to use it that matters." The room fell quiet again. Her words struck deeper than volume ever could. Leonard shifted, his dominance slipping. As diners returned to their meals, the energy had changed. The atmosphere, once heavy with privilege, now held something more real: respect. Leonard had been exposed, and charm couldn't cover it. Deborah stepped away from the piano. Her co-workers offered small smiles and quiet nods. She still had work to do, but she carried herself differently now, more sure, more proud. Leonard's table was subdued, his companions avoiding eye contact. The laughter had died out. The night continued, but Deborah moved with purpose. Confidence bloomed quietly in her. As she cleared plates and refilled glasses, one older woman paused her gently. "You're incredible," she said softly, handing Deborah a coffee cup. "I don't think I've ever heard anything so moving." "Keep going," another man added. "You've got something special. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Deborah thanked them softly, heart full of gratitude. These weren't just compliments. They were validation for everything she had worked for and dreamed of. Leonard, however, wasn't so gracious. As she brought the check to his table, he looked up with a mix of annoyance and reluctant respect. "You've made your point," he said, tone clipped. "No need to rub it in." Deborah met his eyes. "It was never about proving anything to you," she replied calmly. "I just wanted to play." Leonard had no answer. He fidgeted with his drink, his earlier confidence gone. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone saw it. As he signed the bill, one of his companions, a younger man, looked at Deborah and said, "You were amazing, truly." His sincerity caught her off guard. "Thank you," she replied with a gentle smile before walking away. The night ended with Leonard and his group leaving quietly, without their usual grand show. Deborah watched them go, feeling no triumph, no bitterness, just peace. Her mind was already on what came next. Tips that night were unusually generous, enough to cover rent and finally afford the piano lessons she'd postponed. Walking home in the crisp night air, Deborah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: certainty. She wasn't just a waitress or a dreamer. She was an artist, and nothing could take that away. Back in her small apartment, she sat at her old piano. The sound wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. The music came from her heart, just like always. That night was more than a victory. It was a turning point. Her talent didn't need justification. It was hers, and it was enough. In the days that followed, her story spread. Diners who had been there shared what they saw. A few days later, she got a call from a Nashville music producer who had been in the audience. He wasn't offering fame, just a chance to record a demo. She said yes, not because it promised success, but because it was a door she was finally ready to walk through. For years, fear had told her she wasn't enough, but now she knew the truth. Resilience and authenticity were her greatest strengths. Leonard Grayson had tried to diminish her, but she had silenced him with nothing but her music. He represented every voice of doubt she'd ever faced, and she overcame it by staying true to herself. To anyone watching, Deborah's message was clear. Never let others define your worth. The world is full of Leonards, but your power lies in staying grounded and letting your passions speak louder than their doubt. Her journey was far from over, but it had finally begun.